Bo. Whoa, that's a weird way to do it. We'll see how this goes. We have a guest coming on today, anyhow, so I think I'm gonna move. Like I'll probably slide one way or the other. But our guest today is a friend of mine, professor of communications at St. Bonaventure in Virginia. I couldn't get that one out to save my life. And Chris Mackowski is also the chief editor for Emerging Civil War. I think I'm biased. I write for Emerging Civil War. So I would say one of the premier voices of Civil War interpretation out there. But he is also the author, a whole slew of books, but the latest and the greatest is A Tempest of Iron and Lead about Spotsylvania Courthouse, May 8th through the 21st, 1864. And to talk about that, here is Chris Mackowski. Whoa, Chris moved again.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I have to admit, I was really torn, like homebrew history. Should I have a beer with me or not for this episode?
I mean, I have tea, if that's helpful. So,
but yes, you should.
So I have to meet my son off the school bus in a little bit, and I didn't want to show up with beer in my breath for the bus driver. So, I guess that was kind of what it was like. That was the deciding factor for me.
Hey, that's fair. That's probably the best way you could have gone about it. So, Chris, we've got a little bit of time here. We wanted to talk about let's for just a second maybe throw a promo out for Emerging Civil War.
So more than 30 historians with lots of different backgrounds, writing styles, interests, contributing free content every day to our digital platform at emergingcivilwar.com. We're .com, but actually we are a 501c3 because we just have this real education-focused mission. We are a nonprofit, and really we're just trying to help people stay connected with the defining event of American history. And so we've got a podcast, book series, symposium that we do, speakers bureau, so we can go out and talk to roundtables and stuff. Lots of really cool things going on with lots of really cool emerging voices in the field.
We're going to stick the link for Emerging Civil War right down here in our description. So if you're watching this or you're listening to it, just go to the show notes and you'll see that. But Bo, you have some questions for Chris, so let's dive in.
Yeah, that is one of those kind of neat things, about the pandemic that happened. That history went online, and I think Emerging Civil War does a great job at bringing the past to an online world. So, Chris, thank you for being here, first of all.
Oh, sure.
So, first of all, Chris, man, we're here to talk about Spotsylvania Courthouse. And kind of reading up about it, dude, there are so many major players in this. But yet, I would argue, at least in popular culture, really nobody knows about Spotsylvania Courthouse. So can you tell us, brief bullet points? How do we get here? Why Spotsylvania?
Yeah, it's crazy that it's overlooked like it is, because it's the third bloodiest battle of the war behind Gettysburg and Chickamauga, and then Spotsylvania Courthouse. I think people sort of forget about it because it's immediately preceded by the Battle of the Wilderness. In fact, the two battles sort of bleed into each other. They fight at the Wilderness for 3 days. They march and fight overnight and then start fighting down at Spotsylvania the next morning. But people remember the Wilderness because the woods catch on fire. And, so there's just some really gripping, dramatic, horrific stories that come out of the Wilderness. And then if we're to continue on to the overland campaign, we get down to the North Anna River, which totally gets overlooked. And then we get to Cold Harbor, and everybody sort of remembers Cold Harbor and those charges that Grant supposedly made that were futile. And he said that he ever after regretted them. A lot of numbers are manipulated with that. So it has taken on kind of a greater role in Civil War imagination than it probably deserves, but people remember that part of the overland campaign too. So Spotsy sort of gets forgotten. And then because we're in the midst of major battlefields here in Virginia, where we've got Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Wilderness, and Spotsylvania, all part of the same national park, and then Mine Run just outside of the park. There's a lot going on, and Spotsy's the one that is not next to any major road. You gotta go find it. It's out in the middle of nowhere, and so people aren't just driving down the road and "Ooh, there's a brown sign. I got to use the bathroom. Let me stop." So you got to seek Spotsy out. I think that's another reason it tends to get forgotten about.
I mean, I drove around it for the conference last year, missed your tour, if only because I had to do the 8-hour, 9-hour trek back to Tennessee by car. But there's so many little pieces of the battlefield that are saved, and so many little kind of the roadway signs and markers. And while we're at it, we should mention Civil War Trails signs galore. Civil War Trails, proud sponsor of Homebrew History, after all. Find a way to tweak in a marketing gift.
That's right. And they are kind friends to us, Emerging Civil War, with our podcast as well. So Civil War Trails really doing a lot to get people out there on the battle.
They're doing all the heavy lifting on this episode today. But there's so many different little pieces of the battlefield. I mean, I guess it would be the same as if somebody asked me, what's your favorite part of the battlefield at Spring Hill or Franklin? Where's your favorite place to go in Spotsylvania?
That's a great question, because there are so many great places to go. My wife's family actually owns about a quarter of the battlefield, nearly 100 acres on the Eastern Front. So that's my favorite part, because I'm married into my own battlefield. So I get to kind of go out there and explore and, mapping it out and figuring out what took place where in an undertold part of an old undertold battle. So to me, that's, always going to be, to me, super special.
So Chris, who are your major players here, and what does it look like? Because kind of reading up into Spotsylvania, this is a very crucial event, that could easily go either way.
Yeah, so it's the spring of 1864. Robert E. Lee is still commanding the Army of Northern Virginia, but his army is now split into 3 corps instead of 2. He loses his most experienced corps commander, James Longstreet, in the Wilderness. So now he's kind of down to Richard Anderson, Richard Ewell, and A.P. Hill, who gets a bad bout of his social disease, and he's out, and Jubal Early will step up into temporary corps command. So Lee's really operating with his B team for this part of the war. And his cavalry commander, Jeb Stuart, actually gets drawn off by the Federal cavalry and is mortally wounded at Yellow Tavern. So Lee's going to lose his other most experienced commander and kind of be fighting the Overland Campaign with his B team. On the northern side, we have Ulysses S. Grant as commander of all Union armies, hanging out with the Army of Northern Virginia, the Army of the Potomac. So imagine, and you may love your boss, I love my boss, but if he was literally standing over my shoulder every day, that'd be tough. And it was tough for the Army of the Army of the Potomac's commander, George Gordon Meade. Meade also has 3 corps under his direct supervision: Gouverneur K. Warren, John Sedgwick, and Winfield Scott Hancock. And then he has Ambrose Burnside, best facial hair in the army, but he's an independent command because he outranks Meade. So you have these weird command dynamics and structures that really aren't very smooth and don't get smoothed out until later in the campaign.
One of the things that kind of cracks me up is when we talk about the Overland Campaign. I don't know why, but my brain, which Joey already knows, I'm scared of what's in here sometimes. When I think about the Overland Campaign, I think of it as kind of like a Tom and Jerry act, kind of a cat and mouse chase. This is Grant's, opportunity to chase down Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. And is he successful here at Spotsylvania?
Yeah, it's a yes and no question, or yes or no answer, because, he's trying to move toward Richmond to draw Lee out into an open field fight. And Lee keeps kind of getting in his way and digging in. And they become tactical draws as they keep fighting. But then this is why I think that the Overland Campaign and the Battle of the Wilderness particularly is like the turning point of the war from a military perspective, because up to this point, the 2 armies would fight, and then they would withdraw, and they'd spend a couple weeks or a couple months catching their breath. Here, Grant, it's like they fight, and then Grant's just going to go around and keep moving and force Lee to come out after him. So even though we have this series of tactical draws, Grant keeps getting closer to Richmond, and he keeps pulling Lee out into these fights, and he keeps just dealing punishing blows to Lee's army, and Lee can't sustain that rate of casualties. And the North can, and it's a stunning list of casualties for both armies. And Grant's able to just let me bring in some more reinforcements. And Lee can't. And, we were going to end up at Cold Harbor after 6 weeks, like we're on the doorstep of Richmond. So I always give the advantage to Grant because he does strategically achieve his objectives in a way that Lee really doesn't.
So I feel like you're going to give a very biased answer, and I'm going to give a very biased answer. There's a lot happening in the spring and early summer 1864. I mean, this is really where total war, right? Take the kid gloves off. Let's just finish this thing. This is where it all starts to ramp up. So there's fighting in Virginia. There's fighting in northern Georgia. There's some, movement in South Louisiana. The Red River campaign will kick off very soon too. Of those three actions, what's the most consequential?
Results wise, it's going to be, I think, Sherman's move down through Georgia.
Okay, good. I'm so glad.
Yeah, because not only because he captures so much infrastructure, but he ends up with a victory at a time when Lincoln really needs one for his reelection. Grant gets stymied outside of Petersburg, and if that's just the situation, then that's a stalemate going into the election. Lincoln loses the election as he thought he would. So really, Sherman's breakthrough has the leads to those consequences that lead to ultimate federal victory. I will say, though, Grant's the architect of that whole thing, and people forget about that. He's the one who laid out this grand plan. He's the one who's telling everybody move at once. He's the one that is urging Sherman onward. So even though Grant's not there on the scene, he's the one pulling the strings.
And that's fair. I'm glad that at least I'm glad we're on the same page with that, because here I was thinking this was about to be East-West showdown.
Oh no, I believe the war was won in the West.
This could have been an Obi-Wan Anakin fight to the death right here. Oh man, that could have been bad, but I'm glad.
So, Chris, this is Grant's Spotsylvania in particular is Grant's second major engagement in the Union's overland campaign. Does he have something to prove here?
If you were to ask him, he would say absolutely not. He has had a string of victories out in the West. His record speaks for itself. By this point in the war, he's already captured 2 Confederate armies compared to everyone else's 0. So I don't know what on earth he would have to prove anyways. But what he does have to do is kind of he has to live up to Lincoln's expectations. And Lincoln brings him out and he says, look, you're going to be, in charge of all the troops. You know what you've been doing. You just go do it. I'm going to run interference for you here in Washington. And, Lincoln stops meddling for maybe the first time in the war and lets Grant do his thing. But that's a huge trust that Grant does have to then live up to. And I think Grant understands that and recognizes it. He knows that the election's coming. He's got to do something to help Lincoln win re-election, or this will all be for naught. So those are the factors that are really kind of weighing on him. But as far as public opinion, as far as, what his own army's thinking, I don't think he's worried at all about having to prove a thing.
No, on the opposite foot, because now it's been, what are we, almost 14 months? Somebody who's better at math, help me out here. But it's been a little less, it's been less than a year since, less than a year since Gettysburg and Lee's massive defeat there. He's spent much of the fall in maneuver, much of the spring and the winter trying to rebuild and rehabilitate the army. And now all of a sudden there's a new army commander, and he's squaring off against this man who, unlike John Pope, literally had really only seen the backs of his enemies in the West. And now Lee is facing a whole new monster in Grant. How is his command of the army now? Because we talked a little bit about how his subordinates are falling apart, and I've always kind of seen Lee in the spring and the summer of 1864 as the only glue holding the army of Northern Virginia together at this point.
Perhaps the only glue holding the Confederacy together at this point.
And now is there even more strain, right? Is that adhesive just kind of all coming apart? I mean, we can see it in the pictures. We can see it in his health. We can see it in the tactical kind of leadership, because here's a guy, an army commander, who should be in the rear, and at multiple occurrences throughout 1864, he has to ride to the front.
Yeah. Yeah. Like bullets are landing on the ground around him to the front. I mean, that's how close into the fire he is. I think the most telling picture of the condition of the Army of the Northern Virginia is that in the wintertime, Lee is writing to his wife, who's in ill health in Richmond, and he's saying, like, we're in such dire need of supplies. Could you have your friends knit socks for the troops? Okay. He is the commander of the largest, most prominent army in the Confederacy, and he has to have his sick wife's knitting circle make socks.
Yeah.
That's desperate. Those are dire times. Morale overall in the army is pretty good. They're like, here comes Grant. Let's, he's never faced Bobby Lee before. Union soldiers are saying the same thing. Well, he's never had to fight Bobby Lee. But so morale's ready. They're ready for this fight. They're lean. They're hardened. Things are dire. Things are desperate. But morale is good, and it really comes back to the men's devotion to Robert E. Lee. He is that glue that you mentioned.
That's so hard to kind of put into, especially like I teach history at Southeastern Louisiana University here in Hammond, America. And it would be so difficult for me to explain to my students, because they think big picture all the time. They don't think of, oh, that's right, soldiers physically march on their feet, and Brogan's hurt a lot. Socks are super important. And that just all becomes part of the bigger story, and those sort of micro, histories, are so important, especially to somewhere like Spotsylvania. Now, I was reading up a little bit about Spotsylvania earlier, and there was a moment where, the Union almost is able to break through Lee's lines. How does that go?
Yeah, there are actually two instances where they do break through Lee's lines. Once on the 10th of May and once on the 12th of May. On the 10th, it's an innovative new attack formation known as Upton's Attack, named after the commander who leads it, Colonel Emory Upton. His men break through. They move like a fist rather than a long traditional line of battle, and that allows them to punch through, peel open a hole, and they're so successful. There aren't any reserves who are able to kind of flood in after them. And so he's ultimately repulsed. That leads Grant to think like, all right, well, if Upton can do this, let's try it again, larger scale. Let's make sure we've got reserves ready. And he's going to replicate that on a much larger scale on the 12th of May. He's going to punch through the Confederate position. The Confederate position is shaped like a big U, and he's going to punch right down at the very tip or the nose of that U, break through, peel open a line, flood it with reinforcements. Lee, I think one of his greatest moments of the war, is his response to this, and he's able to cobble together a defense. One of the things that I think we really, people know Lee for his audacity, his willingness to take daring, calculated risks. And I think an unappreciated factor of Lee is that he is really good on the fly at improvising. He does it here. He does it again at the North Anna River. And so he's able to hobble together a defense that doesn't reclaim that position, but holds the Federals off long enough so that he can create a new position that he can fall back to safely. And that leads to 22 straight hours of hand-to-hand fighting in an area that's concentrated around a bend in that U that has become known as the Bloody Angle, and it's probably the most famous action at Spotsylvania. But here we see Grant learning, innovating, trying something new, which he doesn't ever get credit for, and we see Lee improvising and reacting in a really effective way, which is something he doesn't typically get a lot of credit for.
I know back in the day, and Joey, were you at Chickamauga when the 16th Louisiana went, and they called it Chickasaw?
I was, in fact, there.
Okay. So he knows more than I do. I wasn't there, but looking into Spotsylvania, it's like pouring down rain, and you're in hand-to-hand combat. That's got to be terrifying, right? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, it starts raining on the 11th of May. It's going to rain for 5 straight days. So when this attack on the 12th launches, it's in the rain. It rains on them the whole time, sometimes super heavy downpour, sometimes kind of a light drizzle. because this is all in Great Virginia clay, it holds the water. So these guys are fighting in water up to their shins, up to their knees. The mud is epically terrible. Guys who get wounded get trampled into the mud and can't pull themselves out, and they get smothered or they drowned. So the environmental impacts of this fight add to the casualty list in a way that a nice sunny day just wouldn't. And just to add extra insult to injury, when the rain finally stops, and these guys have all been buried in shallow graves after this fight, and the rain finally stops, and a lot of these temporary shallow graves have washed up over the course of the rain. So by the 18th of May, Federals are going to attack across the same ground through that field of washed up graves. And the stench on the battlefield is so bad that guys fall out of line throwing up because it smells so bad. So, when you ask about the effects of the rain, it's awful on the fighting, and it makes the aftermath terrible as well.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got two armies that are exposed to it, and just the intensity of the fighting. It come from, again, Western theater guy, right? I worked the battlefield at Franklin. I can't tell you of a bloodier, more terrible fight than right there, but maybe 22 hours as opposed to 5 hours, especially when you add in all those environmental factors. So, Chris, we do have I have a question for you, and this comes from Gordon Ray's books, the kind of the trilogy, really, on the latter portion.
I'll bow at the mention of Gordon's name. He remains the definitive guy. Yeah.
So there's your question. With the studies of the Overland campaign that already exists, what makes Tempest of Iron and Lead just a little bit different?
Sure. And it's funny though, like I never hear anybody ask that question. Like why do we need another book about Gettysburg? Like nobody ever asked that question. We've got basically 4 books out there about Spotsy, and I co-wrote one of them. So then this new one, magnifies the literature out there. Compared to Gordon's books, and I still hold Gordon up as the gold standard. His North Anna book, which is the second half of Spotsy and North Anna, remains my single favorite tactical study. But it takes him a book and a half to get through Spotsy, and I really wanted to do a single volume study. So that's one thing that separates it. Some new sources have come out since Gordon's book, which was 20 years ago. And like I live on the battlefield, I spend a lot of time on the battlefield. And so just my knowledge of the terrain, I think really works its way into the book in I think some ways that add to the literature too. Aside from that, I'm a writer, and I wanted to write a good story. And so I really, and this, I don't mean to sound like I'm patting myself on the back here. I really think that the writing of the book is going to distinguish it from the other sorts of things that are out there about Spotsy. And that's not to take anything away from Jeff Wirt's excellent book about the fighting on May 12th, or Gordon's fantastic book. But I just, I wanted to write a good story that was compelling, that would draw people in. And so I think that's something else that is going to distinguish it from other books.
I can't argue with any of that, because I can see just in reading how your descriptions of the ground are so much more in depth, and it feels as if I'm there when I'm reading it. Whereas, maps are helpful with the other books, the Wirtz book and with Gordon Ray's books. There's, I have to have that companion guidebook and map book out to read along. Where with you, and then too, I guess having been on the ground there with you, seen you in action, listened to you talk about it before, and then to read the book is to kind of put all that together and to get a better appreciation for it. So yeah, no, I'm full on agreement there.
Thanks.
One of the things that Joey and I talk about a lot on this show is how important it is to walk the ground. And as you've mentioned, it's heavily influenced your writing. And I guess how important is that for authors, of the future to do that? It's difficult to write on something you've never seen, you've never smelled. It's difficult to do that. And something that you do, and I'll be picking up your book here shortly, is the storytelling, attention grabbing. I tell people all the time, I said, you can write the best book on anything, but if 3 people read it, because it's lackluster in writing. Well, how good is it? And I think that's something that, and Joey's, clearly kind of read through some stuff too, that you've written, that, you have the ability to grab readers' attention. And that I find that super important, especially in historiography.
No, thanks. Yeah, it's and that's what attracted me to the Civil War in the first place. Like, it is America's great story, and it's full of all sorts of small and even tiny micro stories that are fascinating. And so, like, I will never run out of material writing about the Civil War because there's just so many stories. And so, we're always looking to find ways to bring new generations in and introduce them to this material. And so I just hope that, if I can do that by telling them a good story, getting them hooked, getting them excited to come to a battlefield, getting them excited to read some more, that's really, what I want to achieve.
I think the only topic in American history that would run out of content is probably the presidency of William Harrison.
That's about it.
It's
About it.
But I mean, that's the kind of the fun thing about emerging Civil War. So I went to the library the other day to pick up some books because I'm looking for something to write about, and I just kind of mentioned, oh yeah, I'm a writer. I write about Civil War things. And, the librarian goes, well, don't you ever get bored with writing about the Civil War? I said, how can I? I mean, if I'm bored with the military study, well, I'll do some social history. If I get bored with some social history, I'll do some economic studies. If I get bored with that, which doesn't take a lot, I'll read about environmental factors. Like, there's so many different aspects. There's so many different rabbit holes I could run down. How could I run out? And she just looked at me like, kind of like jaw drop, glazed over. Okay, yeah, it's
But like,
that kind of focus.
People are endlessly fascinating. So even if you don't like the, this regiment moved this many paces and turned that, like if you just concentrated on the people of the Civil War and not just the big generals, but all, you got colorful privates all the way up and down, you'll never run out of content.
Yeah,
never.
Colorful Privates of the Civil War, a book by Homebrew History.
Signed, sealed, coined, and delivered.
Yeah, that one out there for the members only special.
Right.
Now this is getting weird.
Well, that's weird's almost my middle name. It's Joseph, but which is weird that Joey, Joseph, Rick. Yeah. There's a joke to be made.
So does that? So could we call you Bojo?
You could.
We could. Okay.
Joey and I have been mistaken for brothers at a Walmart by a
woman
lovely,
named Tequila.
A lovely young woman by the name of Tequila. Thus, a friendship was forever bonded there in a Walmart checkout line.
Yeah.
So, Chris, how crucial is the defense for Lee here at Spotsylvania? Can he afford to lose it?
Oh, absolutely not. And this is where we're really kind of seeing the payout from Chancellorsville and Gettysburg in '63, where Lee's taking the offense. He is swinging hard. He's going for the fences. He just doesn't have that strength now, and so he has to let Grant call the tune. And so, like, Grant gets to make the first move. Grant gets to decide, where they're shifting the battle. And Lee's got to hunker down and just repulse attacks. And so if any of that breaks, he doesn't really have the ability to just start punching back. He can't swing himself. And so he really has to stay on the defensive. And he's really good at it. He's an engineer. He knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's looking at. He crazily sets up two really poor positions at Spotsy and at North Anna, but he improvises and salvages those situations. So he really kind of has to play defense, play it smart, play it shrewd. He's still going to look for any opportunities he can to kind of get a jab in. Those all tend to go pretty poorly for him.
I'm also curious too, how does, and this may be, because Joey said you teach communications, which is incredibly interesting because my wife has her degree in communications as well. She actually went to LSU for her master's degree and took a class with James Carville.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which was pretty interesting. And then at the end of the class, he invited everybody to his house in past Christian, and it was so funny because you could tell which students were from LSU and which ones were from Tulane.
Okay.
We did a huge crawfish boil, and I didn't go to LSU. I didn't go to Tulane. I went to Southeastern, but I was my wife's plus one.
He
So
was with no shoes on.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And 2 beers in my hand. And he does this crawfish boil, and like all the LSU students, they're eating crawfish like a true Louisiana Cajun, sucking the heads, and then you got the Tulane people that are like, oh dear, oh dear, and the other bow has
made
it. And so, how does I guess media outlets for Confederate forces and Union forces portray the aftermath of Spotsylvania?
The pace is so unrelenting in the spring campaign that it's hard for media outlets in either place to really kind of keep up. What really makes the biggest impact, particularly in the North, would be the rolls of casualties that start appearing in newspapers. And that gets to be a really tense daily ritual in a lot of communities as you go look to see, like, I heard there was a battle, what happened? And then you're kind of reading the papers to see if Johnny's name's there or not. Both armies do have correspondents that are traveling with them. They are trying to get reports filed, but a reporter can only see a certain portion of the battle at any one time. And because the pace here is so unrelenting, because the weather is so awful, it's really hard for them to kind of get a good overview of what's happening. It's interesting. Alfred Waud, the famous sketch artist, he tries to kind of hopscotch across the battlefield and catch scenes that he can, but he ends up really making a lot of his sketches after the fact. He's over on the Eastern Front where Ambrose Burnside is, and he sketches Burnside nearly getting into the village of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And he mislabels it because he did the sketch several days later, and then he's like, when was this again? And so they're having a tough time keeping up.
And that's one of the things that interests me about the American Civil War, is that this is America's first conflict where we have, war correspondence with photography, and that just completely and totally changes, future American conflicts, for forever now.
And it's crazy because, like, the photographers who are tagging along with the Army of the Potomac, they leave just before Grant starts the campaign. So that's why we don't have any photos of the wilderness. We've got like post-battle photos of the wilderness. And so we finally get a couple photographers who show up again on the 18th of May and start taking pictures on the 19th and 20th. So we only get the very tail end of the Spotsylvania captured in photography.
So, Chris, we mentioned him kind of in brief earlier, but this is a man who goes on and kind of revolutionizes how the Federal Army fights through the duration of the war, certainly, but then how the United States military functions later on. Tell us a little bit about Emory Upton.
Sure. So Upton is a 24-year-old colonel from Batavia, New York, which is halfway between Rochester and Buffalo, if folks are familiar up in that area. And he's fresh out of West Point. He is one of those guys that's got something to prove, going back to an earlier question. Kind of a young Turk, hot shot, looking to make his reputation, and he does it by throwing his men into every single fight he can find. And so he earns his reputation, but I will say his men respect him. They don't love him because the dude's got no sense of humor. But they respect him because he leads from the front. And I always like to say, he's not one of those guys that says, go do that. He's like, follow me, boys. And so his guys are, it's like, all right, well, he's at least willing to go into the cauldron with us. And so he's kind of able to work his way up. He's given this important attack on the 10th of May because he is someone who's demonstrated a fighting aggressiveness. He'll get promoted to brigadier general and do well, throughout the rest of the war. But he really makes a significant contribution to American military history after the war. He goes to Europe as an observer and looks at how other armies are doing things on the European continent, comes back and he writes a tactics manual that becomes so influential that the Army uses it until World War II. It replaces the previous tactics manual, which was written by William Hardy. Some people know Hardy's tactics. And so Upton makes this huge, huge contribution, really well respected. It has kind of a sad personal life. He gets married, his wife dies. He gets depressed, develops what we think is probably a brain tumor, and he'll actually commit suicide at his posting out at the Presidio in San Francisco.
Hey, Bo, let's do that thing real quick where we take a quick commercial break, and we'll come right back after this.
We'll be back.
Yeah. So, Homebrew History is brought to you by Civil War Trails. For those of you watching along on the YouTube side of things, you check out the Civil War Trails logo and know that wherever you are, if you're following around Chris Mackowski's podcast here on Homebrew History, around the Spotsylvania battlefields, know that you can follow along with Civil War Trails as well. Get out there, make some history of your own. Grab a picture with a sign, use the hashtag sign selfie, and tag Civil War Trails in your caption, and help us spread the good news about Civil War Trails.
Wait, can I do mine too?
You can do yours too. Why not?
Homebrewed History is brought to you by Civil War Trails, the world's largest outdoor museum with more than 1,500 sites across 6 states. And you can start planning your trip now by downloading a free brochure from civilwartrails.org. How was that?
Can you tell that he does this all the time? Yeah. It's good. It's good right there.
We're all like really big Civil War Trails fans, though. And so it's easy.
That's really all it comes down to, is just loving Civil War Trails. Other things, other updates, other news for you here, commercial wise. Know that all of our designs come from the bearded historian Jeff Williams on Etsy. You can go and search the bearded historian. He's got designs featuring "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" characters all the way through the movie Gettysburg, and my favorite as of late have been my Kelly's Heroes stickers. Woof woof, that's my other dog impression. The late great Donald Sutherland there as Oddball. Please check out the Bearded Historian. Follow along with him on Instagram, on Facebook, and be sure to support our friend Jeff Williams and let him know that Homebrew History sent you. Homebrew History does air weekly. You can check out our latest upload every single Monday. And if you are a member, you can join us on Buy Me a Coffee, where you can help support the show and gain access to some exclusive content, including little mini-sodes with our guests, just like Chris. And I think that's just about all the news we've got. So let's send it on back for some more Homebrew History. All right, Chris, you want to do one question real quick from a guest, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this one, and then we'll jump in and do another one?
Sure.
All right.
I shall call me Minisode.
All right. So, Chris, we have a listener question sent in to us by one of our great supporters and members, Bill Clark, my old colleague from the Battle of Franklin Trust. And Bill wants to know from Chris Mackowski, what is the most overrated battle of the Civil War, and why is it Gettysburg?
Well, I'm going to say it's Gettysburg. He gets a gold star for the question. I'll say it's Gettysburg, and I would say it's Gettysburg. And I love Gettysburg. I grew up near Gettysburg. It is a marvelous landscape, well preserved so you can understand the battle, but the cultural landscape is just spectacular. There's so much to see and look at. I think it's just fantastic. I think it's overrated because William Batchelder gets this government contract to tell the story of Gettysburg, and in order to justify his own work and create this painting that he never gets to create, although we get a cyclorama out of it. But in order to justify all that, he positions Gettysburg as the turning point of the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And because, narratively it happens right kind of midway, it sort of looks like it, but if if Lee wins in the Wilderness and drives Grant away, Gettysburg is just one more kind of notch in the win-loss column, right? It really doesn't have any sort of significance. I think even if the Confederates win at Gettysburg, Meade just falls back to Pipe Creek and they fight a battle there, so they're just, it's a hard sell for me. I think it's just because Batchelder sold it as such, because it was easy for tourists to get to. There were cool things to do, wax museums, electric trolleys, all kinds of stuff. Becomes a vacation resort. And that really then kind of gives it this extra added attention that we tend to give it today. And again, I'll say I love Gettysburg. I think it's wonderful. Turning point of the Civil War is at the Wilderness, because Grant fundamentally changes the way the war is fought. After Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee just moves with impunity right around Northern Virginia, and nothing really changes.
So I think we have.
Yeah, I was going to say we have two segments on this show that have made us who we are, and one of those we call Boohickey. Man, Boohickey is something that is just rubbish, something that is just completely wrong. What do people get wrong about Spotsylvania? What is something that people misinterpret? What is something that is crucial that you want to debunk now?
I wish more people knew enough about Spotsylvania to get stuff wrong. So that would probably be where I would start. I do think that idea that Lee wins these battles during the Overland Campaign. I think that's boohickey, because I think that we have to look at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels. There is a lot to say about a draw out of a lot of this stuff, but I don't think Lee wins a single thing in the Overland Campaign, or else Grant wouldn't be knocking on the door of Richmond.
Good point.
Yeah, that's fair. Hey, Bo, what's in your cup?
Yeah, so I have unfortunately, the past 2 weeks, I've been dealing with illness X. It's not COVID. It's not flu. My boss, before I left work yesterday, he said I should call it Bovid-19, which I'm like, I picked the right person to work for. That's my type of humor. And Joey suggested Borona. Yeah. Either one of those are my top two names right now. But in the spirit of that, I've taken a bit of a play out of Joey's playbook, and I brewed some tea, but I also added my own flavor to it. We got some honey whiskey in here, so hot toddy for the day.
Yeah, very good.
Chris, how about yourself?
I actually have Diet Mountain Dew made with my own SodaStream fizzer.
Ooh. I am drinking out of a cup from the British Museum of Natural History. And to make it even more British than it needed to be, a nice English tea with some honey and lemon. There we go.
Very good. Very good.
I was fearful, Chris, that you might be drinking. Because it's kind of got that green, Mountain Dew flavor. What's that alcohol? It's not absinthe.
Limoncello. It could be limoncello. But it's brake fluid. I'm drinking brake fluid today.
Definitely good for the liver.
Tasty. Well, Bo, Chris, on behalf of Homebrew History, I want to thank all of our listeners, our members and supporters for checking in with us here on Homebrew History. And thanks again for sending in your questions for us. If you want to hear some of the answers to these other questions, become a member on Buy Me a Coffee. And just for $5 a month, that's not a lot. $5 a month. You could skip a cup of coffee for the day. You could brew it at home. You could maybe not buy the extra 2 packs of gum when you go to Target. $5. I don't know. I'm trying to think of other ways to save $5. But $5 is nothing. $5 though does help keep Homebrew History running. So join us on Buy Me a Coffee, and you get to ask questions of our guests, gain access to exclusive mini-sode episodes, as well as live streams with Bo and I, and sometimes a guest. So be sure to check that out. Follow the links down in the description. Support Civil War Trails, The Bearded Historian, and your boys right here at Homebrew. Until next time,
Chartreuse. That's the one. Chartreuse. Don't ever drink that. Jesus Christ. It tastes like lawn clippings and ground black pepper. Horrible stuff. But anyway,
right.
yes.
On that note,
what we just said.
I'm going to play you off.
Thank you.